Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. In today's video, we're going to talk about a few very interesting things and kind of break them down. Number one, I want to talk about the finances. United had, of course, published their quarterly earnings this morning, which is always very interesting to look at. I will not bore you with too many details on it, but I do want to run through a few things and explain because it will definitely be quite enlightening. And despite what you're seeing on social media from people who clearly have never owned a business, it doesn't quite paint the picture seemingly people are trying to paint with it. And I really don't know why, and it does get frustrating for me. Being painted as a PR merchant for actually explaining things as they are, rather than continuously trying to paint things in a different light. There's negative and there's positive PR, I suppose, and I would argue that the vast majority of the media has some sort of negative PR being pushed for some reason. It's actually a little more promising than I thought it would be, frankly. But we'll run through exactly why. I also want to talk about Rafael Varane. And his comments, which confirm, again, a number of things last year that I stated. Some of those were refuted that are now being called out. But there's some other interesting things in there, not just about Ten Hag, but also about United itself that are, I think, extremely demonstrative of the problem that we have in the club. And then the last thing that I want to cover, I went over it on a live, but I want to explain it. I want to show this sort of chart and grid of United's wages and what they're actually doing to correct it should we have the worst situation and miss out on any Europe this at the end of this season, going into next season, which seems entirely plausible. How is it, given these finances, given everything, that we'll be able to do any sort of transfers to get ourselves back where we need to be? Well, I'm going to show you that as well. Let's look first at Varane. This is what I wanted to mention. According to Varane, Ten Hag never explained to him why he was left out. They had some robust discussions, and then he didn't play for 2 months and simply said he disagreed with him. He said he was not on good terms with him. He said, "I hear what you said," and then he didn't play. Varane said that this was a regular thing, that Ten Hag was always trying to make an example of someone and leaving them out and alone. He was always in conflict with leaders of the group. And later on in there, Rafael Varane says, I think that, he says that there was always problems, essentially, and he was surprised that Ten Hag stayed because the relationship between him and all the leaders of the group and everybody was basically completely broken. Again, I would say, go read this article from The Athletic from Charlotte Harper. I'm not going to go through the entire thing because I don't think that's right, but I just wanted to share some key moments, and I think people should go read this. It's pretty scathing on things. A lot of stuff I shared last year about Ten Hag falling out with quite literally half of the club, half the team. His closed-door policy on communication, where he did not accept the reasons that he didn't accept people coming to him with concerns, with discussion, with anything. It was just, he would just ignore it. There was no relationship, no team building, no anything, and it didn't sit right with a lot of people. The other thing that Varane says here, which I did think was very interesting, is, let's go down to here. Here, even from the inside as a player, there wasn't a clear structure on how things were going to work. There hasn't been a fixed methodology for years. At Madrid, we have defined way of doing things. At United, it was not clear defined how to recruit, how to play, how to communicate. There weren't the same procedures, processes, and structures. It's not one person's overall responsibility. That's the problem. We don't even know whose fault it is. It has to be the overall structure of the organization. Too many people involved in the decision making, don't know who's making decisions, don't know who's responsible, all of that. No framework. No foundation, all of these issues. And I think that, obviously in that respect, Varane, what he says in his comments and things like that really do reflect upon what's been so bad at United and, why things are the way that they are. We've never recruited with any kind of direction or purpose. The way that everything has been run is just a complete and utter mess. So yeah, it's also an impossible job for any coach. But these are the types of processes that also have to be fixed for United to be successful in the long term. And that takes work. It takes years of aligned recruitment, of aligned management, of proper communication channels and avenues and things like that in order to get there. And, time will tell whether that is actually resolved or has been resolved from INEOS or anything like that as of yet. We shall see. So, so that's that side of it. In terms of, Rafael Varane, his comments, it confirms some things. He also says he was surprised Ten Hag stayed, as I think we all were. But yeah, it confirms a lot of things that we knew about, and that I kept sharing many times about just how it was impossible. These were the concerns that were originally had by Wilcox and people when they came into the club about how the communication was awful, how there was no attempt to build relationships between players and with the players and the coach, and that it was just like a constant, that there was just all of these things were poor, and some of it's on Ten Hag and some of it's not. Now, of course, that makes it all the more baffling why they ended up fucking up the decision to sack him in summer. Given all of these things, like I said, it was decided, it was the best thing. They 100% had to do it. Ten Hag was a serious problem, but they still didn't. And that, of course, leads us to the finances that I want to discuss, because that will be in part of this. And I'm not going to go through all of it, but there are some key points that I think are worth mentioning. These are just sort of the general commentaries on the overall quarter. It's not particularly that important. However, one of the things that they have stated is that they actually think it's going to be at the higher end, that we're going to end up financially by the end of the season at the higher end of what they expected it to be in terms of good rather than bad. That doesn't mean we won't be having losses, but it means, I think, doing a bit better. So, looking at everything here, I just want to I want to sort of share this point, okay, on some of the key financials. The biggest change here, our commercial revenue is actually up. That's due to the Snapdragon deal and some improvements there. That's a good thing. Overall, commercial revenue up about 5%. Broadcasting revenue is down over 50 million. This is primarily 45 million during the quarter. This is primarily due to the loss of revenue from Champions League. And so that was to be expected. And part of the obvious big concerns were, if we're down 40 million in revenue, this is a 6 months comparison. So 6 months ending, 27 million of it during this second quarter ending December 31st. United are down 40 million in revenue. Again, that is primarily, oops, why did you reset on me? Primarily due to the loss in Champions League revenue. Let's go down to a couple important things here, because we want to talk about all of that. We'll break down the finance costs and things as well, the interest payments and everything. At the end of the day, though, what we look at is we're down 40 million in revenue, down about 32 million in operating profit. That's all kind of unfortunately expected from missing on Champions League. It says here that, the sponsorship revenue was an increase primarily due to new Qualcomm front of shirt agreement and some other changes. Retail merchandising, apparel, and product licensing revenue was 42 compared to 9.5 due to the launch of our new e-commerce model. So this kind of went under the radar, but I remember reading something about it where they took the e-commerce in-house with scale, so they're making a lot more money on the things they're selling. So this is a way we can make more money on, that revenue is up. That's actually quite an interesting one in terms of the commercial aspect, improving on that. So they've already been increasing that. Broadcast is down because of Europa League compared to Champions League. Match day is up because of hospitality packages. So there was more hospitality packages paid for. Same number of games, mind you, so it's not because of that, but 4.4 million because there's more hospitality packages purchased. Okay, fair enough. Whatever the reason, that's fine. Operating expenses down a little bit. Employee benefit expenses down because wages were reduced going from Champions League to Europa League. Other operating expenses were up due to increased costs associated with the new e-commerce model, partially offset by reduction in fixed costs as a result of improving operating efficiency. So we don't have all of the specifics here, but essentially it cost money to bring that e-commerce model in-house. But they're also saying we actually cut our costs a lot we've already started cutting costs a lot from letting go of employees. Those savings we will probably see, based on the last thing, more in the next report, and the next one after that. But the increase of 6.4 million is also offset by the fact that our revenue was increased by 9.5 million by bringing it in-house. So this decision to bring it in-house seems to have been a profitable one so far. The rest of that kind of stuff doesn't matter. Okay, exceptional items for the quarter were 14.5 million. This relates to the cost associated with the departure of former men's first team manager Erik Ten Hag and various members of football staff. So I've seen a lot of talk about this going out, about, oh my God, 4.1 was Ashworth, they've confirmed, okay? So the total cost to get hire whatever Ashworth was 4.1 million. The cost to move Erik Ten Hag on and all his staff was about 10 point something million, right? Now, the thing that I keep going on about on this, which I think is just where I say there is a clear, inaccurate bias and agenda in the reporting, is they had to sack Ten Hag. But they didn't give him the contract. He was under contract. Whether they sacked him in summer or whether they sacked him then, it was going to cost the same amount of money. Okay? So we have to really be honest about things instead of just saying bullshit to try to paint things in a negative light. INEOS didn't cost them 10 million to sack Ten Hag. It cost 10 million to sack Ten Hag because we had to sack Ten Hag. That could have been earlier, and it should have been earlier, mind you. That's the error. The error is the timing. It's not the cost. They did not cost the club an extra 10 million compared to what we would have, because we had to sack Ten Hag. It had nothing to do with him. Ten Hag should have been sacked. He should have been let go. It was 100% the right decision. So that cost was going to be spent no matter what. The question is when. And where they messed up was, did it too late. The timing was poor. The timing was disastrous. This should have been done in summer, but the cost, not a factor. It was always 10 to 12 million. You can go back to the stories in June, and you had people writing articles saying that it was going to cost 12 million to sack Ten Hag now. Same people who are today writing somehow that it was like this new cost nobody knew about. No, we knew it was going to cost that money to sack Ten Hag. The question is when. So the mistake from INEOS was 4.1 million on Ashworth, 100%. That is money. That was an error of 4.1 million that they cost the club. On that ill-advised hire and fire of Ashworth that just didn't work out. 4.1 million. Okay. Now I want to talk about this. Net finance costs for the quarter were 37 million compared to 0.3 million, primarily due to unfavorable swing in foreign exchange rates. So what this means is that the US dollar, when it gets strong, it means that, because that's where our debts are, it means it's costing us more in pounds. It's going up, okay? So the US dollar has gotten stronger over the last 6 months, which means the debt is costing us more. Our borrowings are costing us more. Now, at the same time, we used to, when we weren't completely fucking broke, balance this a little bit because we also had cash holdings in the US. So when the US cash holdings went up, so did our pounds holdings, and it would help to balancing. That's hedging, basically. And that allowed us, that balanced it. So when the dollar went up, costs went up, but so did our cash. When the dollar went down, costs went down, but so did our cash. It balanced. We don't have cash holdings anymore in the US because we're too broke. So now it's just debt. So when the US dollar goes up, the debt goes up, and there's nothing to balance it. That sucks. That's bad. That is definitely bad. No doubt about that. The rest of this, yada yada. Okay, this is what I want to. This is a big point I want to share, because I mentioned before that the INEOS injection of money. People have been saying, well, what about that debt? INEOS aren't doing anything about that debt. False, wrong, completely incorrect. Net cash flow from financing activities for the quarter was 59.9 million compared to blah. This is due to 80 million received from INEOS Limited in exchange for an issue of Class A and Class B shares, partially offset by a 20 million repayment of our revolving facilities. The prior year quarter saw a 60 million drawdown on a revolving facility. So I need you to understand what that means for a moment. Last year, we took out 60 million more debt in the second quarter, the same one period we're talking about, October through December. We took out 60 million more debt because we didn't have the cash to run the club. That's one of the major reasons, on top of the Glazers' original loan. Remember when I did that chart and I showed it split? Some of it's the Glazers' original debt, some of it's the debt repayments and interest costs, because we keep having to borrow money just to run the club. So instead of borrowing 60 million, okay, all right, and getting 60 million more debt, instead, we were able to pay down 20 million of debt. That is an 80 million swing. That's the 80 million from INEOS. It was actually improved our debt situation from 80 million, because without it, we would have had to borrow 60 more. Instead, with it, we can pay off 20, an 80 million swing in debt from INEOS. So it is going to debt. It is dealing with debt in two fronts. One, by helping pay down the debt, and two, by helping improve the cash flow of the club so that we don't have to keep borrowing more money. Okay? That's very important. And then let's go down to, there's one more sheet to look at that kind of explains this, blah, blah, blah. Here we go. All right. Finance costs. Now, an important thing to note is our interest costs are actually, they're very high, 29 million, because there's also finance income, by the way, which kind of balances out at times. So you have to factor both of those things in, because some of it's exchange rates. It swings one way, it swings the other way. There's different financing costs and things like that. Our overall finance costs were 29 million for 6 months, ending 31 December. Last year, they were 35 million. So our overall debt costs have actually gone down by about 6 million so far this year. So, and that was before this 80 was put in, because not before, it's kind of including that, but then there's also that came at the end of the quarter. So we're going to likely see lower interest payments over the next 6 months as well. So in the end, we should end up paying less in finance costs this year by a significant margin than we did last year. We'll see where we are by the end of the season, but last year, I think it was in the total almost 50 million that it cost the club in total finance costs. And again, to be very, very clear, this is a combination of exchange rate issue, the Glazer debt, 100%, and the borrowings the club has to make to run the club and pay interest on those borrowings because they're broke, okay? That problem is being taken care of or assisted drastically by the INEOS injection, where it's reducing the amount we have to borrow and paying some of that debt off. So they have paid some debt off there. Not the Glazer debt, but the actual functional debt for running the club. Okay, so the Glazer debt is still an annoying, awful hole, which is about 10 million of this, but the rest of it is due to these borrowings. But it is lower by 6 million. So hopefully, by next season, by the end of the season, we'll actually see it be 15, 20 million lower than last year, and it'll continue to minimize that debt. Remember, I showed that very likely the debt would start to be minimized to just the Glazer debt, which is still a drain on the club and an inexcusable thing from them, but we can't do anything about that until they decide to do something about it. So, we're doing what we can. The club is doing what it can to deal with the debt that they can deal with the extra injection of funds and the changes to the overall costs to run the club. So when you look at the 6-month period as a whole, it's actually a lot better than you might expect. We lost 40 million in revenue. Bear that in mind, right? We're 40 million down in revenue, but we're only 21 million lower in loss and profit and loss, right? So we lost 5 million by this point last year. We've lost 26 million by this point this year. That's with 40 million less revenue. So you can see we've actually made up a gap of about 14 million there. So there is some, and some of that is interest by paying down some of these debts, so we're not paying as much interest. Some of that are the moves of letting go of staff, bringing the e-commerce in-house, and increasing some of the revenue there. And that's with having to pay out the 10 million to Ten Hag and the 4 million to Ashworth. So if you remove those things, which are one-time expenses, okay, we would have lost 12. So we would have lost 40 million in revenue, but only lost 7 million more. So that's a swing of 33 million, okay? And I think that what that tells us is that the cost controls and the injections and debts and things like that are doing what they're supposed to reduce the loss and minimize the loss that United are experiencing and help to balance the books in the way that that we can. So even though we're losing money, it's actually better than it has been, and the books are starting to balance because we lost revenue from Champions League. We could have been a situation where we lost 45 million. Like if you want to make the comparison with the cost of sacking Ten Hag and Ashworth and the loss of revenue, we should have lost maybe 59 million. Now let's cut that down by, I think it's 12 million or so on wages being cut for Champions League, so that goes to 47. So we should have lost 47 million. We lost 26. Those are because of paying down interest, cash injections, and the other changes that are going on with the club to balance the budget. So it's giving us more margin here to work with. And I also want to demonstrate, I've got something, where are you? There we go. I wanted to show this as well. Now, a huge hullabaloo has been made over, this Ashworth 4.1 million, okay? And I want you to really grasp, okay, when we're talking about mismanagement, when we're talking about all of these kinds of problems, and we're talking about, all of this stuff where I say it gets ridiculous, what is the real costs to United, right? Dan Ashworth cost 4.1 million. It's a 4.1 million mistake. And it was presented 159 days of Ashworth cost United 4.1 million. 159 days of Casemiro cost United 14.4 million. 159 days of Mason Mount cost United 10.9 million. 159 days of Luke Shaw cost United 5.675 million. 159 days of Anthony cost United 10,549,000. 159 days of Sancho cost United 7,975,000. All right. So it's all about putting things into context without just fear-mongering, scaring, and getting into all that. Are those costs good? Absolutely not. Is this 4.1 million down the drain? Absolutely. It sucks. It pales, absolutely pales in comparison to the incredible amount of waste that has been spent on bad transfers, bad players, overpaid wages, and on extending shitty contracts. It absolutely pales in comparison to those things, because that is what has driven United into the ground. Okay, and of course these are just these 5 players. There's plenty of other players we can include in this who've contributed virtually nothing over a 159-day period, and what they brought to the table and what they have done in comparison. That's a huge issue. That's really the financial ruin of United is mostly brought about by all of that. So that's an issue. That's a concern. Yeah, that is a concern. More than anything, and that's partially what's being resolved. So when we look at last summer, there's a strategy here in play as well. in terms of the overall strategy, the overall look, the overall direction that United are going, in terms of balancing the books financially. Because when we looked at that issue, right, we saw that we missed out on Champions League. We reduced our losses down to where, without the sackings and things like that, maybe we're only on course to lose like 20-30 million. That's good. That's better. But it's still a loss of 20-30 million. And what happens if we miss out on Europe entirely and we drop out another 50 million revenue? Then we're still in a position where we're screwed and we have to go do transfers. So what do we do about it? Well, when you look at last year, in terms of dealing with waste, United were able to move on about 49.8 million in terms of yearly wages, which was about 25% of the yearly wages that they had, and an average age of 26 of those players. I need to add this in. I apologize that I missed this earlier. I went through this on the live and I forgot to add him in. So this changes this number to 36. Let's just say 37 million. All right. Got to add Mazraoui in because he was the only older player added on. But you can see that they dumped about 49.8 million in wages. They brought in about 37. So that reduced our wages a little bit for bringing in 10 players. And you can see the average age. That makes the average age of 21, in fact, for all of this. So we can see that part of the strategy here, again, reducing the wages, reducing the ages. Now, one of the other thing that keeps getting kind of bandied around here is that United spent 200 million on players for Ten Hag, but that's not the case. It's completely false as well, and people know that too. Again, it comes down to presenting things quite honestly. United did not buy Lenny Yoro for Erik Ten Hag. United did not buy Ugarte for Erik Ten Hag. We know that because they had a huge fight over it, right? It was like this big drama. We could probably doubt that they bought Xerxes for Ten Hag. We know they didn't buy Dorgu for Ten Hag. We know they didn't get Heaven in for Ten Hag. We know they didn't get any of these young guys in for Ten Hag. So the only potential debate you could have is Mazraoui and Matthijs de Ligt for Erik Ten Hag. Mazraoui was very affordable, is a very good player who's suitable, costs 14-15 million, plays really well in the back three as a center back, better than he did at fullback. So, maybe you could argue Matthijs de Ligt, but at the end of the day, every single one of these players is contributing to the club at the moment. It's not like they bought them and they're unusable. Matthijs de Ligt fits into the back three. Mazraoui fits into the back three. There was obviously an overall thought process in mind with buying these players. It's not like they're waste. And when you compare them to the players that we're looking to move on this year, and when you compare them to the players who were bought under Ten Hag, there's a huge difference in terms of the usability of them. So again, the transfer strategy, they all know it too, and that's where it's frustrating when it's said this way because it's not true, was not buy Ten Hag players. It was to pursue players on the basis of a club strategy. If we were buying Ten Hag players, we wouldn't have Ugarte, we would have Amrabat, we wouldn't have sold McTominay. There's a big difference in how the transfers would have looked if we were just buying Ten Hag players. Now, again, one could definitely argue that Matthijs de Ligt and Mazraoui were. But of course, we also know Matthijs de Ligt have been on United's list for a long, long period of time as well. And they made that point very clear in summer. So, we'll see. But again, they didn't waste a bunch of money. Every one of these players is playing Euros for the future. Ugarte is playing. Xerxes playing. Dorgu was purchased under Amorim. And de Ligt has played plenty, and as is Mazraoui as well, and the young players weren't. So we know that kind of whole narrative is false too. But when we look at this summer moving forward, and we look at, all right, what can we do to spend even if we miss out on Europe? Well, this is again kind of the plan. Reduction of overall costs, right? When I went through that PR versus PSR video, talked about how we need to swing things by like 80 to 100 million total. Well, we know that we're reducing our costs by about 40 million between changes to the employment, hiring. We're handling some of the debt, not the original Glazer debt, but some of the other Glazer debt from mismanagement of the club. We're handling some of that and bringing the expenses to run the club down by 40, 50 million. But without Champions League, we're not going to be able to increase the revenue, so we're not going to get that 100 million swing that we need. So we have to bring the expenses down way more if we're going to be able to continue to spend on transfers and buy players, right? We have to get another 40 million off of the books, basically, to not lose so much money so that we can go spend on transfers as needed. Well, that's what's being done here. That is the transfer strategy for this summer. I put out a tweet. United are looking at shedding 45% of their wage bill. Well, that's these players right here: Sancho, Rashford, Antony, Malacia, Eriksen, Lindelof, Evans, and Heaton. Sancho, Eriksen, Lindelof, Evans, and Heaton are done. Free agents, obligation to be sold to Chelsea if they finish above 13th, which seems very plausible. And then you have 3 players who are out on loan right now. That's why I've included all of these guys in this list. There's more players that could be sold, but these are all the players either definitely to be sold, released as a free agent, or currently out on loan with a very good chance that they do get some sort of option taken up at the end of that time. That amounts to 62 million a year in wages. If they can somehow shift Casemiro, that's another 18, 19 million in wages and an average age of 30. When you look at the prospects of who they could bring in balance on this, you're talking about Kenda, which looks like it'll happen as a young player will be on low wages. If you bring in a young keeper like Trafford or otherwise, they're not going to be on high wages, 50 to 70K. If you bring in like a Braithwaite or a Huijsen, someone like that, they'll probably be on 75 to 100K. If you bring in another young player in the vein of Kone, Leon, Heaven, all of that, like a Rig, a Nippon, a Masantuono, a Joe Bellingham, they're going to be on low wages, 25 to 50,000 at absolute most. If you then can go big on a forward for Osimhen for 250K, fine. If you go for someone like Delap, that'll obviously be a lot less, 125 to 150,000. And then you've got some kind of, say, midfielder that's on 100, 125K, similar to Ugarte over here in terms of age, age and profile and all of that. So making all of these moves potentially in summer, you might be adding 30 million a year in wages, but you're cutting 60 to 80 million. So again, and bringing the average age down. So you're talking about overall between last summer, this summer, the overall strategy, bringing the wages down by, 10, 12 million there, and then potentially another 30 to 50 million here. So you're talking about 40, 70. If you can shift guys, anybody else, you could get more. But realistically, United will end up cutting the wage budget, even after signings of players, by about 30 to 50 million this summer. And that'll total 40 to 60 million between last summer and this one in terms of bringing the cost of wages down for players. So, when we look at the books overall and balancing them, this is the strategy from a transfer perspective where, that will actually put us profitable if we're in Europe. Probably balances the books if we're in Europe, where we can actually be not losing and hemorrhaging money all the time, but potentially breaking even, which is kind of where we need to be. You want to be breaking even. You want to invest every dollar that you have. Profit just means you can spend more, so you don't want to have profit necessarily. You want to be able to spend all of it on football expenses, on more transfers, on more things that you need, on reinvestment in the club. There's no dividends going to be taken out, so if there's any profit, it'll stay to help balance the books and then be spent, reinvested into the club. So between the cuts, staff, between some of the other moves being made, and between all of this, they're looking to essentially get the books balanced, basically, and that will allow us to spend because we have to. Basically, we have to be able to spend because obviously there's the transfer fees for all of these players coming into play. Well, that's just the regular amortization levels that we've seen. As long as we can continue to spend about the same amount on transfers, our amortization level will stay the same. So that's not going to change the yearly books, but bringing the wages down will, and that will allow that to happen. So even if we miss out on Europe, with the plan in place, with the other adjustments that are already made, we should be at a point where we can still make these transfers, do these deals, and get things done for summer and get players. And I'm not talking necessarily about all these specific exact players, but you get the concept of bringing in younger players on decent wages compared to the ridiculous kind of salaries we've been paying out for some of these guys, right? Which is just unbelievable. We're never going to do that. We're definitely avoiding all of that. We're definitely avoiding, this when you compare the cost of these players for 159 days. It's unbelievable. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good overview, general look at the financials, at the total situation around United. Big mistakes are not sacking Ten Hag in summer because realistically, we'd probably be doing a lot better now. And again, maybe that means we lose out on European revenue because of the chaos of the season, and that is waste. That is a mistake. That's an error for sure. The cost itself is a non-factor. The cost itself is a non-factor, and it being presented as if it's some extra cost of mismanagement is total bullshit. People know it. They should stop saying that because they know what they're doing when they say that. Cost to sack Ashworth was terrible. 4.1 million total cost for Ashworth. Just a 4.1 million mistake that they need to not make. So those are two errors tied to each other, mind you. Not sacking Ten Hag at the right time. The whole Ashworth situation. Two errors there in terms of overall football management. No doubt about it. But in general, the finances have improved. Despite the loss of revenue from Champions League, improvements to commercial revenue due to bringing the e-commerce model in-house, and then reduced costs from cuts being made, and reduced finance costs, which are still high, and a shame, but reduced because of the injection of funds, which meant we had to borrow. We didn't borrow our 60 million and in fact paid off some of the debt instead. That makes a big difference to the club overall. So that is a positive improvement. And then the plan moving forward will be, we'll see more savings from the cuts that are being made. The wage bill will be brought down another 30-40 million this summer, even with signings, so that even if we miss out on Europe, which they are prepared to do, that we will be able to invest in transfers to help get things back where they need to be. So yeah, it's not all happy, but if you understand the realities of where we've been, it's kind of going according to plan. And as I've said before, some of the things that are just out there, I like to knock down because I just don't think it's all right to misrepresent the situation. One of those, again, is the cost of Ten Hag. The other factor is the debt aspect. The debt that the Glazers have taken out of the club is unbelievable, and it is shameful. A good portion of it at this point in time, however, is due to the fact United have no money because they're going broke, and hence the cuts, hence all of that. But the INEOS injection of funds is dealing with the debt, despite what some people might tell you or just ignore for some reason, because it's all there for you to see. It's not my opinion. I read it out to you, so it's not anything but that. It's what you can see in the books for yourself. So it's kind of going according to plan. I think the best thing and the smartest thing is reducing the waste in the football side more than anything, because when you look at the numbers, it's absolutely ridiculous how we waste 80 to 90 million a year on players that do nothing for us, and that is a bigger problem than anything else at the moment, that they need to shed that. The waste on the football side, the poor transfers, the poor signings, the massive contracts have ruined this football club. And that is the bigger thing than anything that is important to get taken care of, and that they continue that process of shedding these players and moving them out come summer. Okay, that's what I have for today. Today's video. I'll probably do some. I might be back on a podcast with Phil today later on. We just had some things going on last couple of days. I'll be doing some lives, tactic shows, things like that through the rest of the week as well. So thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on. See you in the next video.